evening and welcome to NTD UK News. I'm Stuart Lees. Here are today's top stories. Protests against vaccine passes and mandates in London over the weekend. The passes are set to be introduced in Scotland and Wales next month.
A number of people from industry have organised a legal challenge in Scotland against vaccine passports. And that's fantastic. We're going to see more legal challenges. We're going to see more political challenges. Lots of people from the country getting involved.
The fuel shortage continues. The government says there is no current plan to use the army to drive tankers.
The most important thing is that people just buy petrol as they normally would.
And Ukrainian Oleksandr Usyk defeats Britain's Anthony Joshua to become the new world heavyweight champion, claiming 4 belts.
This was the biggest fight in my career, but it wasn't the hardest one.
Protests in London over the weekend against vaccine passes, mandates and the rollout in schools. This comes as Scotland and Wales plan for vaccine passes next month. So far, the Prime Minister says they won't be introduced in England. NTD's Jane Well has the story.
Many people here feel government measures are going too far.
I think for the state to divide families, for the state to divide communities on the basis of health, is a health apartheid, and who, in their right minds, to be honest, would like to see health apartheid be something that is rolled out across this nation and other nations of the world.
And give us the confidence.
The Prime Minister says vaccine passes won't be introduced in England, although he says the idea will be kept in reserve.
They've said at the moment they're not going to introduce vaccine passports, but we really need to keep them and hold them to that promise, because vaccine passports, I think, would introduce a 2-tier society and would fundamentally undermine central tenets of medical law and medical ethics, that we should have choice about what we put in our bodies. And I cannot see any medical justification for doing this.
Vaccine passports are really digital identity. It's the Chinese Communist Party system of social credit and control. And I think a lot of people here, this is the main concern of a lot of people here, that we don't have vaccine passports. And we've seen them being rolled out in various countries around the world.
Scotland and Wales are set to roll out COVID passes next month. Nightclubs are planning legal action against Scotland's plans.
We were never told that we would have to do this deal to participate in society. It's not on. Everyone's sacrificed so much. We need no vaccine passports anywhere. A number of people from industry have organised a legal challenge in Scotland against vaccine passports. And that's fantastic. We're going to see more legal challenges. We're going to see more political challenges. Lots of people from the country getting involved. Over 100,000 have signed the togetherdeclaration.org. We're encouraging many more. We're going to be at party conferences. And we're going to keep fighting this. It's not going away.
While thousands protest, others walking past say it's not straightforward.
Vaccine passes, obviously it's quite of a hot topic. So many people have, variety of opinion. For me, it really depends where we're talking about an urban area or we're talking about somewhere like distant and remote locations. So I don't think there is a just simple answer.
Some aren't against the idea of passes, but say it does bring challenges.
For me, you've got to trust the experts. I mean, of course, you shouldn't be restricted to what you can do if you don't want to have the vaccine. So it's a tough one. I'm not an expert. I'm just telling you what my views are. Get double jabbed, and let's open up.
I've travelled recently and I had my vaccine passport, so it made it easier to go to Greece. My parents are currently in Tunisia and their vaccination, they had Pfizer there, but their vaccination's not valid here. So that's a problem. So when they come here, they'll have to go through the whole process again.
Many at the protest worry their children won't enjoy the same freedoms as they did and are continuing to voice their concerns. Jane Werrell, NTD News, London.
The petrol crisis continues with thousands of filling stations running out of fuel on the weekend. The government asks motorists to stop panic buying and says there is no current plan to use the army to drive tankers. Here's NTD's Joy Duguid with the story.
Thousands of petrol stations ran dry over the weekend. Environment Secretary George Eustace calls on drivers to stop panic buying.
Petrol, both in refineries, output is at normal levels, and we have plenty of petrol in stores. And the most important thing is that people just buy petrol as they normally would. There isn't a shortage. The cause of these current problems is that panic buying episode.
Eustace denies that Brexit played a part in the crisis.
Certainly, I think the biggest factor in all of this has been COVID. We're seeing it around the world, disruption to supply chains, shortages of labour, quite a bit of turbulence actually as the whole world comes out of this pandemic.
He says the government has no current plans to use the army to drive petrol tankers.
But we always have a civil contingencies section within the army that's always on standby should they be needed, but we don't judge that's necessary at the moment.
Industry leaders warn drafting in the army will not end the fuel crisis, but the Environment Secretary confirms the Ministry of Defence is helping resolve the HGV driver shortage.
We are bringing MOD trainers in to accelerate some of the HGV training to clear a backlog of people who want to carry out those tests.
Long queues at petrol stations continue. In London, drivers express their frustration at not being able to fill their tanks.
It's ridiculous, you know, I've just turned up, going to work normally, got 20 miles of fuel left because can't get any in Milton Keynes where I actually live. Come down here, you've just got to get in the queue now, haven't you?
I need fuel. I was meant to be at work at 8 o'clock, look what time it is right now. It's terrible. I tried to come here last night, same thing. Went to 3 different petrol stations, all closed.
Over the weekend, the government suspended competition laws to allow the industry to share information. Oil companies can then target areas where fuel supply is running low. The government is also creating 5,000 3-month visas for foreign lorry drivers in an attempt to ease the driver shortage. Joy Duguid, NTD News.
Brexit, pandemic restrictions and tax reforms have influenced the UK's lorry driver shortage. The government is now responding to remedy the problem. NTD's Malcolm Hudson is here with a report.
The lorry driver shortage is a widespread problem that is leaving logistic companies struggling to meet demand. Analysts at Transport Intelligence found that Europe is short by over 400,000 drivers. According to their report, the UK was short by over 70,000 HGV drivers in 2020. Though a more recent post-pandemic estimate by the Road Haulage Association places the shortage at over 100,000. The UK has felt the effects of the shortage more acutely than most other countries due to a number of factors. Many foreign lorry drivers have returned to Europe since Brexit, as well as over the course of the pandemic. The government closed driving test sites due to pandemic restrictions, preventing new drivers from being trained, and recent tax reforms have also led lorry drivers to leave the industry for better pay elsewhere. The government is now taking action to tackle the shortage. The Department of Education is investing £10 million to train up to 3,000 more HGV drivers through free intensive courses. An additional 1,000 drivers are expected to be trained through local government's adult education budgets. The Ministry of Defence has also announced it is deploying their defence driving examiners to increase the country's testing capacities for 12 weeks. Alongside this, 5,000 foreign HGV drivers will be able to enter the UK with a 3-month visa to provide temporary relief to the haulage industry in the lead-up to Christmas. The government is also calling on employers to make investments in the UK domestic workforce in order to build a high-wage, high-skill economy. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
The discount supermarket chain Aldi is set to invest £1.3 billion over the next 2 years to accelerate its business growth. It's expected to generate more than 2,000 new jobs next year. This will add to the 7,000 permanent roles created over the past 2 years. The investment will include 100 new stores in Britain. Aldi also plans to expand its logistics infrastructure to include a new distribution centre in Leicestershire and to invest in technology. Britain's 5th largest supermarket group is privately owned by Germany's Aldi Süd. It has 920 stores in the UK and an 8% market share. The chain's sales last year soared by 10% to £12.3 billion. Oleksandr Usyk defeats Britain's Anthony Joshua to become the new world heavyweight champion in 4 divisions. The Ukrainian challenger put on an incredible performance in London. NTD's Kostas has more on this.
Oleksandr Usyk dethroned British world heavyweight champion Anthony Joshua in London. The Ukrainian now has 4 belts as world heavyweight, IBF, IBO, WBO and WBA champion.
At this moment in my career, this was the biggest fight in my career, but it wasn't the hardest one.
34-year-old Usyk won gold medals at 2012 London Olympics when he was an amateur. He was also a cruiserweight world champion. This is only his 3rd professional heavyweight fight.
Yes, London is a really lucky city for me, but not a single victory in the professionals can be above the Olympic gold.
Usyk put on a masterclass in front of 67,000 boxing fans at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on Saturday. The scorecards were all for him. This is the 2nd defeat of Joshua's professional career.
Well done to the winner, and we'll be back again. Get back into training. Great 12 rounds. Great experience as well in the ring. And we progress from this point on once again. So we'll be doing it all again soon.
Joshua says he won't look at the negatives. He will focus on getting back in the gym to improve on his mistakes ahead of a rematch.
Oh yeah, look. I'm a different kind of animal, yeah? I'm not a sulker, you know. This is a blessed opportunity to be able to fight for the heavyweight championship of the world, to fight good fighters time and time again.
Joshua says fighting a left-hander was tricky, but he gained valuable experience from the loss.
There's an old saying, innit? If you want to go down as a great fighter, don't fight southpaws, especially good ones. So he's a good fighter. Southpaws are tricky, right? They're not the easiest fighters.
Joshua says he would still fight fellow Brit Tyson Fury, even without any belts on the line. Kostas, NTD News.
China strongly condemned Britain today for sailing one of its warships through the Taiwan Strait. Beijing said the behavior harbored evil intentions and that the Chinese military followed the vessel, warning it away. A spokesperson for the Ministry of Defense says the warship is navigating the Taiwan Strait in accordance with international law to the next destination. British Royal Navy warship HMS Richmond posted on Twitter, after a busy period working with partners and allies in the East China Sea, we are now en route through the Taiwan Strait to visit Vietnam and the Vietnam People's Navy. The Taiwan Strait is a narrow waterway separating Taiwan and mainland China. China claims Taiwan as its own territory, as well as much of the nearby South China Sea. HMS Richmond is one of the warships, along with the HMS Queen Elizabeth aircraft carrier seen here, that make up the UK carrier strike group, currently deployed to the Indo-Pacific. Still to come, concerns that Europe's biggest economy could be in for months of uncertainty after the German election fails to set a clear direction. That and more after the break. Germans elected a new parliament on Sunday. The race for who will succeed Chancellor Angela Merkel, though, is not yet over, since the 2 biggest parties are staking a claim to lead the new government. NTD's Eddie Aiken has more on this.
The German Social Democrats pushed on Monday for a quick agreement on a coalition government. In Sunday's parliamentary elections, the centre-left SPD narrowly beat Chancellor Angela Merkel's centre-right Union bloc. The Chancellor candidate of the SPD called for the Union to go into opposition. The voters have very clearly spoken. They said who should form the next government. This is therefore the clear mandate the citizens of this country have given. This comes amid concerns that Europe's biggest economy could be in for weeks or months of uncertainty after an election that failed to set a clear direction. Scholz tried to dispel those fears.
You should know Germany always has coalition governments and it was always stable.
The Union bloc, or CDU, saw its worst ever result in a national election. There is no question that this result cannot, must not, and will not satisfy the Union. We managed to catch up in the final spurt, but at the same time there are painful losses. But Laschet also staked a claim to leading the new government. While the first-placed party typically leads German governments, this wasn't always the case. I don't claim first place. We are second, but the coalition is formed on the basis of issues and from the majority in the German parliament. Since both the SPD and CDU finished with well under 30% of the vote, they would need to form a coalition with the two biggest opposition parties, the Greens and the Free Democrats. This federal election gives the FDP a special responsibility. We do not underestimate the dimension of the challenges. Quite the contrary, but we are ready to make our contribution. The business-friendly Free Democrats, who made some gains, usually align with the CDU, and the environmentalist Greens traditionally lean toward the Social Democrats. But neither of them ruled out going the other way.
We have a mandate not only for future generations, but, you sense, this country needs a renewal, a real awakening, and above all, this country needs a climate government. That is a result of this federal election.
The Greens made significant gains in the election to finish third, but fell far short of their original aim of taking the Chancellery. The only other option for a parliamentary majority is a repeat of the outgoing Grand Coalition of the Union and SPD that has run Germany for 12 years of Merkel's 16-year tenure. But there is little obvious appetite for that after years of government squabbling. There is no time limit for forming a new government, so it could take until next year. Merkel and her government are to stay on in a caretaker role until Parliament votes in a successor. Eddie Aitken, NTD News.
The election wasn't the only race in Germany on Sunday. The capital city hosted the Berlin Marathon. Some 25,000 runners took part in what is said to be the world's biggest marathon since the pandemic. That's little more than half the number from 2019. Last year's Berlin Marathon was called off, and it only returned this year under strict hygiene measures. Participants had to be fully vaccinated, recovered from COVID-19, or have a negative PCR test result. There was no wind, but it was warm on an idyllic autumn day. Guye Adola of Ethiopia won the men's race, and Gotiton Gebrelassie of Ethiopia won the women's race. And in France, a report by a government-affiliated think tank reviews the Chinese Communist Party's counterproductive quest for global influence in recent years. It concludes that the regime's biggest enemy is itself. NTD's Cost Jimenez has the story.
A report by a French government-affiliated think tank says the Chinese regime's biggest enemy is itself. The 650-page French-language report is from the Institute for Strategic Studies of Military Schools. The report says China's relations with the West have markedly deteriorated since 2017. One notable example is Sweden, the first Western country to establish diplomatic relations with the Chinese Communist Party after it took control of China. Since Gui Kongyo was appointed Chinese ambassador in 2017, Swedish public opinion has dropped significantly. Gui threatened Swedish officials not to attend an award ceremony for a detained Chinese dissident. He also criticized local media that reported critically on China and forced a hotel to cancel a Taiwanese National Day celebration. The report says Sweden's foreign ministry has summoned Gui around 40 times since his arrival in 2017. The country's parliamentarians have twice requested his expulsion from the country. 4 years ago, less than half the Swedish population had a negative view of China, but now it's 80%. The report says the relationship between Australia and China also deteriorated. Australia called for an independent probe into COVID's origins in 2020. Beijing started retaliatory trade sanctions. Beijing's reaction is met with increased resistance against Chinese influence. Australia passed a law last year to place extra hurdles for Chinese-linked firms attempting to acquire Australian assets. Beijing is also criticized for hostage diplomacy. 2 Canadians in China were detained following the arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. Meng was released last week after a deal between Canada and US prosecutors. Then the 2 Canadians were freed. The report also notes the regime's suppressing of freedoms in Hong Kong has angered the UK. The report says Beijing's counterproductive behavior in recent years made it so unpopular that it could weaken the Communist Party itself. Kostam NS, NTD News.
Norway is joining a growing list of countries that are removing pandemic restrictions. And a top Norwegian health official says that COVID-19 can now be considered similar to the flu. NTD's Joy Dugard has the details.
Norway is opening up and life for Norwegians is going back to pre-pandemic normal. The country's Prime Minister told a news conference on Friday, "It is 561 days since we introduced the toughest measures in Norway in peacetime. Now the time has come to return to a normal daily life." The Assistant Director of the Norwegian Institute of Public Health said, "We are now in a new phase where we must look at the coronavirus as one of several respiratory diseases with seasonal variation. In other words, it can now be considered similar to the common cold or influenza. That's because the vast majority of those at risk are vaccinated. Norway will no longer require businesses to implement social distancing measures, allowing them to use their full capacity. The country will also allow restriction-free travel from various countries. But anyone who tests positive for the virus must quarantine, and some restrictions will still apply to those arriving from countries with a high rate of infections. Norway joins its fellow Scandinavian countries. Sweden announced earlier this month that it will remove most of its virus restrictions, as did Denmark at the end of August. All 3 countries have low death and virus cases. Joy Dugard, NTD News.
Hundreds of fishermen demonstrated in northern France on Friday. This follows the government's plans to create several maritime wind farms in Normandy. NTD's Kostam NS brings us the details.
French fishermen marched through Normandy on Friday, dumping fish at authorities' offices to denounce offshore wind farms they say would damage their livelihoods.
What's happening today is that the fishing industry is completely fed up. There was Brexit, Jersey, meshing rules, and now the wind farms, of course, which removes fishing zones from us, which will destroy everything, and I don't think the government realise it.
Fishermen say wind farms could drive away their catch or kill existing species with the noise they emit.
If you put a wind farm 500 metres away from a fishing trawler, it emits about 200 decibels. The fish will not survive. No species, no shellfish, nothing will survive. They will destroy everything. That's all they'll do.
The government defends the wind farms as a source of clean energy and job creation. They aim for the facilities to be operational by 2027. The fishermen don't share the government's optimism.
We'll find ourselves with boats that are no longer profitable, because we can no longer go out to sea, especially if we can no longer catch anything. Owning a trawler is a business. We have to earn money, and for that we have to go out to fish. And if we can no longer fish because there are wind farms everywhere, because there are no fish anymore, no shellfish at the bottom of the sea because everything left, everything died because of the mess of the wind farms, then it's over.
About 60 trawlers also took to the sea with fishermen raising lit flares in Friday's demonstration in Cherbourg-en-Cotentin. Kostam NS, NTD News.
A sculpture by Michelangelo is being unveiled to the public in Florence after an intense restoration process. Art historians believe the 2-year project reveals new insights into the Italian sculptor's work. Here's NTD's Neil Woodrow with more on this.
Michelangelo carved the Pietà, which is now in the Museo dell'Opera, as a personal expression of his religious spirit. It was meant for his tomb, and he included his self-portrait. So it's a deeply personal work that he intended to express his spirit even after he died. He was very old when he began. He was 80 when he stopped working on it.
Art historians have always identified Michelangelo's marble with the white marble from Carrara, one of the world's most prestigious. But according to Paolo Rosa, the main restorer of the Pietà, it actually originated somewhere else. She believes the stone came from a quarry in northern Tuscany's Seravezza, a much less noble kind of marble.
The fact that it was from Seravezza means that the marble has specific peculiarities that Vasari, in his first reliable essay on art history, considered hard, impure and producing sparks at every chisel blow.
The board of the Opera del Duomo offered visitors the opportunity to follow the restoration process minute by minute.
When Opera di Santa Maria del Fiore
decided to start the restoration of the Florentine Pietà by Michelangelo Buonarroti, also known as Pietà Bandini, we chose to start an open work site, allowing all visitors to follow the live works, to evaluate the progress, to grab all the details that the restoration could offer.
Di cogliere tutti I dettagli che il restauro poteva offrire.
Weighing nearly 6,000 pounds and standing over 7 feet, the Pietà Bandini takes its name from one of the families that originally owned the piece. It was carved in the mid-16th century and left unfinished by Michelangelo. Originally meant to decorate his tomb in Rome, the Pietà is now part of the heritage the artist left to the city of Florence. Neil Woodrow, NTD News.
That's the news for today, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Stuart Lees. Thank you for watching our daily news show on YouTube. You can also watch our other programming on channel 190 on Sky TV or on Freeview via channel box on channel 271. In the meantime though, please give this video a like and hit subscribe to our channel. Have a good day.